Hey, Rex here at RW Mods. Today we're going to do a video on glow plugs. There seems to be, I don't know, at least on Facebook, some of the newbies and stuff really don't know much about glow plugs other than they just screw in there like a spark plug. So we're going to go through some of the things I've found in different plugs. First of all, you need to know if you have a turbo plug or a standard plug. So I don't really have a standard plug out, but this is a standard plug. Uses a washer. So if you take that out, this washer is separate, and that's what seals. The washer is what seals on that. A turbo plug screws down in there, and the taper is actually what does the sealing. So it's a smaller. The performance difference is you can make the combustion chamber smaller down at the bottom because it's tapered down there, and you can make the better performance. I think you could probably get a standard plug to work and make just about the same amount of power. But for a standard for racing engines, the turbo plug is basically all the engines for racing purposes are turbo plugs. Cost-wise, there isn't much difference, so it's better to just go with the turbo plugs. You have more choices and such. Another thing is having a good glow plug igniter. This is the Dynamite. It's a LiPo. It's got a LiPo in there. Works very well, lasts a long time. If we go racing for a weekend and there's 3 of us racing, 2 classes each, this lasts the whole weekend. Sometimes I'll just plug it in on Saturday night before a main day, just to make sure it doesn't go dead. But they last a long time. When you use something with nickel metal hydride or double A's and stuff, they tend to lose their power faster. Like when the battery's half dead, it doesn't have as much voltage, so it doesn't light the glow plug quite as well. So there's basically 2 contacts down in there. So the center of it's right there, and then the outside is basically your ground. So when you plug it in, it glows. And that's a good way if you have you're having trouble starting your engine, you can pull the plug out and see if it's glowing. Also, too, on these, it's nice because if it's a dead plug, this light will not light up. So even when just you're starting your engine and this isn't lit up, it's not going to start because the glow plug's dead. And what happens, ooh, this thing's hot. There. It got pretty warm on me. What happens if you run lean, maybe over time, the glow plug the wire will break or burn out, and you just change it out for a new one. It's kind of like a incandescent light bulb. It's kind of a fragile coil in there. And then the other thing people talk about is hot plug, cold plugs, and different things like that. So I have quite an assortment here of plugs. So let's just talk with the Novarossis right now. In Novarossi brand, you have the C7 is probably the coldest. I don't know if they have a colder one than that. They could. So a 7, a 6, and a 5. That's kind of the range that most people use in Novarossi. More of your on-road engines and stuff use the 7. Almost all of the Novarossi engines get shipped with the C6, and the C5 is a little bit hotter one. Now they do have some different versions of this. There's a gold one, and there's some different ones one that says it idles better and stuff too. I've never tried those, but that's also something you could play around with too. Just find a plug that you like. In the OS plugs, P7 I believe is the coldest. P6 is the next step, and those are mainly on-road engines that use those. I don't. I should have one out here, but I don't have a brand new P3, P4. But I don't. I don't have a P5. But um, normally for off-road, if I'm using an OS plug, I'll go with the OS P4 or P5. And then I have these FX here also. And the FX plugs, because some brands will use other brands' plugs and repackage it. So these FX plugs are actually made by OS. Um, if you look at the shape of the plug and stuff, they're really close. So they're actually made by OS. And if you can get these more available than the OS, that's fine too. And then I have some here I would consider kind of a Taiwan plugs. OS being Japanese and the Nova being made in France. I don't know where exactly they're made. Maybe they get them in China made somewhere. But I would consider these more of like basher plugs, like your Dynamite number 5. I'm not really 100% what the heat ranges are on the Dynamites. Probably similar. Like a 5 is probably this says number 5 hot. So that would be kind of a medium type plug, even though it says hot, because like the P3s and stuff are like super ultra hot. And then these are, I have a Argus and Alpha T3. That's kind of what comes with the Alpha or Argus engines. They're kind of a cheaper plug, but if you're just bashing and it seems to work good for you, that's fine. One thing about an avid racer or someone that's really serious about racing, spending a couple more dollars on a higher grade plug is probably the way to go. You don't want to have that plug go bad out in your A main. So find a plug that works well for you. If you're just bashing, a lower end plug is probably going to be fine. And then as far as the standard plugs, it's kind of the same principle. It'll say hot, ultra hot. OS makes plugs, and there's some different companies like McCoy, but I don't really have a lot of experience because I haven't really ran a standard plug for quite a while. I do know with the standard plug, there's 2 different lengths. I don't even know which manufacturers use what, but there's 2 different lengths. So if you take one out and you buy a new plug and it's longer than what you just bought, it's the glow plug would stick out into the combustion chamber a little bit. Now it's not going to hit the piston or anything. It's only about one width of the washer there, but it is going to raise compression some, might cause issues. So if you buy the wrong plug and you bought the long plug and you're supposed to have the short one, just compare them before you put it in. And you can double up the washer to make the long plug work where the short plug is supposed to be. Now, if you put a short plug in where a long plug is supposed to be, you're going to reduce the compression, but it still might run okay. You're not going to hurt anything. It might flame out or not idle as well or something, but I don't really know a lot about. I don't really use the standard plugs much. So getting into I guess quite a few years ago, RC Tech used to be big and stuff, and guys would say, you can't use an OS plug in a Nova Rossi, or you can't use a Nova Rossi plug in an OS, or you have to use the brand plug that came in your engine. Well, yes and no. I did some research a few years ago, because people said, oh, the tapers are different on a Nova Rossi plug, and O'Donnell used to make a lot of plugs, and I used to use a lot of O'Donnell plugs. This is the 97T, which is totally different numbers than what we've been talking about. But so if you look at these two, let's try and look at. If you look at those two, the taper's longer on one than the other, and this and that. Well, at work I'm a machinist, so I put them on the optical comparator, and the angle of all of them was very minimal difference. You probably get more, like I said at the time, you probably get more variance between the same brand as you do between OS and Novarossi, say. They were very, very close. And if you notice, this one is this should be an OS plug here. Yeah, this is an OS P4. Well, you'll notice that it's kind of relieved farther to back. And the Novarossi plugs, if you look at that, the thread goes all the way down to the taper, almost all the way to the taper. And this O'Donnell's kind of that way too. So what I found at that time was, you could use an OS plug in a Novarossi, but you couldn't really use the Novarossi well in the OS engine. And the reason for that is, if you look at the thread there, this goes down in there, and OS, let me hold this up. OS didn't tap quite as deep in their head buttons as Novarossi. Novarossi tapped theirs right down to the taper. And OS they kind of almost got it down to the bottom, but they had the relief in their plug, so the thread didn't have to be all the way down to the taper. So if you put a Novarossi plug in an OS, the threads actually bottomed out before the taper hit, so it leaked. Now you could probably crank on it and maybe get it to seal. And at the time, I just took and simply just put it in a lathe and just took a couple threads off, and then it worked fine. But I never personally had a problem really with plugs not sealing, but it could be an issue with some people. Now, people said, well, you can't use an OS plug in a Novarossi. Well, actually, it should seal fine. But the problem I thought guys were having was they would take this OS plug and put it in the Novarossi, and if you just cranked on it and then put it in there, it would kind of distort the bottom where the seat is. It would kind of distort a little bit because there's less, you got all this pressure on less area. And then they'd put a Novarossi plug back in, and it was kind of distorted a little bit, and it might leak. That's kind of the findings I came up with a few years ago, and it's not as big I don't see as many people talking about it now as they used to. Guys seem to swap brands more often than they used to. But the thing is, if it is probably best to start out with a plug and stay with that plug, because a certain brand, the taper might be a little different on the Dynamite or the Novarossi, and it's probably best. You're going to have the least amount of issues if you stick with the same plug. Some people ask about what's the difference between a hot plug and, is it just hotter? So a hotter plug, let's grab this. What's this one? I don't even know. Some of these plugs could be dead, but. So this is a number 6 plug. And a hotter plug, actually, the filament is hotter. And I think this should glow. This is a P4. It should glow brighter. This one might be kind of dead too. These are all used plugs. So that one's a little, you're not really seeing much at the bottom there. Try this O'Donnell here. So that one looks a little brighter. So basically, they're a hotter temperature. The hotter plug is a hotter temperature. Well, why wouldn't you just go with a hotter plug all the time? Because it's not going to flame out as easy. Well, part of the problem there lies what was the engine manufactured for? And you get into talking about Novarossi and OS. Yes, you can physically put an OS plug in a Novarossi, but almost all OSs come with a P3 plug, and that is like one of the hottest plugs. It's an ultra hot plug, and that's what they come with. They're designed for an ultra hot plug. These P6 and P7 are more for on-road. But they're designed for an ultra hot plug, where Novarosi's, their philosophy is the colder plug. They usually come with a 6. And we'll take this, take this piston. And what I found with Novarosi's is their compression is higher. So the piston is closer at top dead center to the head button. And usually there's about, on average, I would say 24 thousandths at top dead center to the head button. And that's pretty easy to measure. I would recommend after break-in, if you're going to check it, break in your engine, because you're going to have trouble with it. With the pinch being tight, you're going to have trouble with it staying at top or whatever. So basically what I do, I've got a video out there doing it, but basically take the back plate off the engine, put the engine at top dead center. It's really hard to do it without the back plate off to tell, because it could be here, it could be here. You can tell if everything's lined up. And you basically measure down, and then you measure the head button. You measure from here to the shim, and that difference is your clearance. Some guys used to use solder. I tried that once, and it like rocked the piston, and the piston came up, and it's only on one side, and it kind of rocked the piston. It seemed like it was hard on the engine. I don't like doing that. I like measuring it. So going back to you take a Novarossi, it's got 24 thousandths piston to head clearance. It's a little more compression than some other engines, and you put a OSP3 plug in, and then you end up with detonation. Detonation is basically the hotter plug, as it's coming up to the head button, the hotter plug will ignite the fuel mixture sooner. It's hotter, it's going to ignite it sooner. So going from a cold plug to a hot plug is actually advancing the spark, like on an engine, advancing the distributor to get the spark sooner. It sparks before top dead center, because at high RPM it's actually, by the time it fires, the piston's already started on its downstroke. So basically you can tune your power band. If you have say you have a hot plug in there, an ultra hot plug, and you put a colder plug in, you're going to get a little less bottom end, a little more top end with that. That's why the on-road engines use the colder plugs. Plus they're at wide open longer and such. So if you want to put a OS plug or the standard, like the P3 in an Novarossi, you can do it. You just add a head shim. And probably, like I said that in my measuring head clearance video, is probably 4 or 8 thousandths. It's better to know what you got, and what that detonation. If you can look at this head button, see how it looks kind of sandblasted, and that could be due to preignition. But this one's pretty extreme. I'm betting a bearing was coming apart. So if you pull an engine apart and the top of the piston and the top or in the head button look like that, you probably got a bearing, rear bearing coming apart. Little pieces of the chrome off the balls, or little pieces of the ceramic balls are coming apart, and it's going through the engine. And you'll see that with little tiny minute scratches, actually smaller than these. These are actually pretty good size scratches. You'll see just barely visible scratches in that, and that means the bearing's coming apart. But that's a separate problem. But you'll notice the top of you can kind of see that's a glow. Sometimes the glow plugs can drop in there too. That's very rare, but the top of your piston and the head button will look a little bit slightly sandblasted, and that means that you're probably seeing preignition, and that's probably only underload off the corner. Probably more common in a truggy, because they have more traction and such too. Like a buggy is going to spin off the corner, it's not going to load it as hard and preignite. So that's kind of the problem I see. Is I see guys, they'll take an OS and they'll throw a P3 in it. It's like way easier to tune. And that's another thing with the Novarasis are a little harder to tune when you got a number 6 plug in there. It's a colder plug, so it requires a little leaner mixture. So if you're breaking in an engine and everything's really rich and it just dies, well, that usually means that if you went to a hotter glow plug, it might stay running, or you need to lean it out a little bit. So, and that's with the higher compression. It ignites with the more compression. It ignites a little bit easier, so it doesn't need as hot a plug. Kind of jumping around here a little bit, but it's a little hard to explain. I don't have any script or anything here, but so if you put too hot of a plug, if you put OSP3 in most Novarasis, I have measured some that were closer to 28 thousandths, which would probably be okay. I never usually go to a P3. I like this one. Was it this one? That one's a T3, so that's like the Dynamites. I used to run a lot of these O'Donnell, the 97T and the 77T. That's the 6. This is a P4. I run those almost exclusively. The coils are a little bit thicker, basically a thin coil. When they manufacture it, if they use a little bit thinner coil, then it burns hotter. But they also you'll notice a little difference between the diameter around the filament. So this one's with more air gap around it, it's going to burn a little bit hotter than if it's kind of shielded by if there's less diameter around the coil. So you see quite a bit of difference in some of these. Just the diameters around the coil, the size of the coil, the thickness of the coil. So that's how the manufacturers make the different plugs different heat ranges. So I guess that's my biggest thing for doing this video is I get engines in for rebuilds all the time, and they have a P3 plug and an Novarasis, and I see some sandblasting, and they get a little detonation, and detonation can cause other problems. So it's basically igniting before it gets to the top. So it's on its way up and it's igniting and it's fighting against itself. It's kind of like pinging on a car that you're driving and stuff, your daily driver and stuff. If it pings, it's kind of ignition, and that's sending kind of a shock down to the rod. And I've seen it on some engines where it actually will break that brass bushing in the rod in pieces, or it's hard to tell sometimes if someone over revved it or whatever, but it is hard on things. So if you got an Novarasis, you can add a shim. It's best if you can measure. Not all guys can measure, have a caliper, or can measure it. What I like to do, what I kind of recommend is, most Novarasis come with a C6. And then I recommend adding like a 4,000th shim, the thinnest shim you can get, and then run the C5. And it'll idle better. It won't flame out as much. It'll probably give you a little more bottom end, but not a ton. It just won't flame out, probably is the biggest thing. It won't flame out as much because with the colder plug, your tuning window is smaller. You can't, if it's too rich, it's going to flame out. I haven't ran Novarasis a lot, but you had that time, you go down the straightaway and it just, at the end of the straightaway, it flames out. Like, really? But it's because it just floods it kind of. So you have to be closer with your tuning with the colder plugs. But also, on the other sense, is you got a P3 plug in there, it's not going to flame out. It's whatever, and your tune can be way off, and that's not helping either. Your tune could be off, and it's kind of masking the tune. So watch my tuning video. I talk about idle gap and different things too, and that's been a pretty good way to tune for me at least. So I think that kind of wraps up this video. I hope you learned something about plugs. I don't know what's coming up next. I think I want to do a video on restrictors, carb restrictors. That's kind of a small topic, but some people ask all the time, like, what's this do and stuff. So you can leave a mention in the comments if there's something you want to know about or do a video on, just a quick little video and stuff. So this is one I've been wanting to do for a while. We got, if you notice, I've been doing a lot of videos lately, COVID-19 and stuff. I've actually been working. I'm a machinist, and apparently I'm essential, whatever. It hasn't really affected me much. I've actually got more money because I haven't been going out to eat or doing anything. But shout out to everybody that's got to stay home and watch my boring videos. but I have had a little more time because I haven't really been doing much after work, and just kind of been having fun making videos and stuff too. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.